The US President Joe Biden has defended his record in office and decision to remain in the race for a second term. He's faced a lengthy news conference at the end of the NATO Summit in Washington, fielding questions about his age and his fitness to serve. The President also spoke on China, Ukraine, Israel and Gaza. He didn't get off to the best start, mixing up his Vice President Kamala Harris's name with his opponent's.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one, the fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again.
North America correspondent Barbara Miller was there in the room for the press conference and joins us now. Barbara, just describe to us what it was like there in the room. What stood out to you?
Well, it was a very tense atmosphere in that room, also a pretty controlled atmosphere. We saw Joe Biden call on specific reporters from a list on a piece of paper he had. We have seen him do that at previous press conferences. No suggestion, of course, that any of those questions were given to him ahead of time. I think what will stand out are the gaffes. There was the Kamala Harris gaffe there that you just heard, where he confused her, calling her Vice President Trump, and didn't pick himself up on that mistake. And then the gaffe before he even went into the press conference, where he referred to President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine as President Putin. But otherwise, this was a man digging in again. That was very clear. He said repeatedly that he thought he was the best person to take on Trump. He was asked about why he hadn't proved to be a transitional president, why he hadn't handed over, as was expected he might do, to the next generation, to his VP, Kamala Harris. And he said, what changed was the gravity of the situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy and domestic division. So Joe Biden really seeing himself as the person whose experience meets the moment. We also heard more excuses as to why he might have been tired at that disastrous debate a couple of weeks ago. He seemed to be blaming his staff, saying that his staff keep adding things into his schedule, and he's copping some heat from his wife about that. So that adds to the kind of litany of excuses we've heard from Joe Biden. He was boasting about his record. He did acknowledge that he needed to allay concerns, allay fears, but I didn't get the sense that this was a guy who was really leveling with his audience. He was very confident, very proud of his achievements, and not really giving anything, I don't think, that people who are concerned about his leadership could hold on to. There's no real acknowledgement, I think, still of just how deep the concerns go about Joe Biden's presidency. He tried to make light of his gaffe as he walked off the stage, as it was put to him that he had mixed up the name of his vice president. That joke didn't quite land, and he walked off the stage. On the whole, like an okay performance, a lot better than it could have been. Not good enough, I don't think, to allay the concerns of those who have so far come forward and expressed the opinion that they don't think he should be the candidate.
Yes, and on that, Barbara, given that this happens on the backdrop of so many people calling for him to step aside, where does this leave Joe Biden's candidacy?
I think as far as he's concerned, it rolls along. He's due in Detroit on a campaign event tomorrow. He's announced a one-on-one interview with NBC on Monday. It feels like we keep lurching from one test to the next since that debate. In terms of whether people will move to try and get him to stand aside, I don't think the performance tonight was bad enough that we'll see an avalanche of people now coming forward. It's going to take some senior leaders in the party either to come out publicly and humiliate him, or to have a quiet word with Joe Biden. He did give them one little wedge there. He said that he was asked if his team came forward and told him that Kamala Harris had a better chance of beating Trump than him, would he stand aside? And he said, unless they came back and said there's no way you can win, no one's saying that. So a little acknowledgement there from Joe Biden that perhaps if some data is presented to him that he can't win, that he will consider that. But he also basically said, well, how reliable are the polls during that press conference? So it feels like, after all this anticipation, so far, not much has changed. We'll have to see whether when morning comes, whether more senior Democrats or any really senior Democrat is prepared to come out and express fears that they've been expressing behind closed doors publicly.